You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, and welcome to episode 104 of the Soul Forge podcast.
Welcome to the Soul Forge, a place of silent mystery, quiet contemplation, and outright mayhem. Join your host, Sean Vanderloo, as he guides you through the adventures of living. Together, we'll talk about life and love, sex and dating, joy and heartache, memories and loss, and so much more. Don't worry, it's not nearly as pretentious as it sounds. Get ready for life, the universe, and everything on the Soul Forge.
Hey everybody, it's your ever-present host, Sean, back at you with another exciting episode of Soul Forge podcast. This week is going to be a kind of a behind-the-scenes tutorial type episode. See, what happened was this week and the last few weeks, the podcast topics have just been flowing so easily. They've just been coming along and hey, here's an idea, here's a topic, here's a guest, here's somebody that wants to talk about something. And this week, no idea what to talk about. I put out a call on the Facebook page for possible topics and I got a couple interesting responses, but it's Tuesday as I'm recording this, no time to do any research. The episode comes out Thursday morning and it's Tuesday afternoon right now. After I record this, I have to go give blood, and then Wednesday is supper with my son, so not much time left for much of anything. So what we're doing this week is we're going to talk about you as a podcaster. So you want to be a podcaster, eh? Here's what you need to know. So just a brief topic, a brief look at what I've learned in my 5.5 years of podcasting. I may have touched on this briefly in other episodes, but I don't think I've ever focused on podcasting as a particular topic. So we're going to go real meta here and actually talk about the thing that we're doing. I'm recording the thing and you're listening. Probably the best way to go about it is to talk briefly about the history of podcasting. Last year I went to a convention, ThunderCon, in Thunder Bay, and I was supposed to give a podcast panel, and no one showed up. So, kind of a waste of time and waste of research, but from what I remember, podcasting started around 2004, 2005, and didn't really get going till about 2009, 2010. Mark Maron, of course, of the WTF, has been doing it since 2009. He was one of the more famous originators. I didn't even hear about podcasting until maybe 2010. Dennis at work said, hey, you should listen to podcasts while you're delivering the mail. I'm like, yeah, maybe. Don't think I'll ever do that. Fast forward a couple years, 2012, I get an iPod, a secondhand one, which I'm still using to this day, actually. And I'm like, okay. So I started listening to music, and I'm like, I don't really like listening to music while I'm walking and delivering the mail. I find it too distracting. So I remembered what Dennis had said, and I figured I'd download a couple podcasts just to see what they're all about. So yeah, this was summer 2012, I guess. They seemed kind of interesting, and I listened for about, I could say, a year and a half. And October, November of 2013, I was like, I think I could do a podcast. So I thought about it for quite a while. What would I talk about? Am I going to do a Star Trek podcast? Because that's my number one fandom. But there were so many episode review Star Trek podcasts out there, I thought I couldn't do it justice. And I didn't want to devote the time and the energy to researching and watching each individual episode and then talking about it, because people were already doing that. So another love of mine is just general geekery. I used to be big into being up to date on all the latest casting news, who was going to be in what movie, when was this movie coming out, what was the plot. I used to spend hours every day just perusing the different online websites that were talking about all that kind of stuff. Not so much anymore. I've got other things to do, but back then that's what I loved to do. So I thought, you know what, let's do some general geekery podcasting. So me and the wife decided to start the Rusted Robot podcast, and it launched January 1st, 2014. And actually, it's still going with my buddy Josh.
Hi, this is Admiral Adama.
My name's Robert J. Sawyer.
This is Cena Grace.
Hey, this is Stephen Amell.
Hey, this is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemechek.
I'm hanging with Sean and Bridget. They're telling all about general geekery.
And you are listening to the Rusted
Robot
Podcast.
The #1 rated robot-related podcast.
Northern Ontario.
You should be following them on Twitter.
Keep listening.
Don't forget to follow them on Twitter.
Subscribe on iTunes.
TheRustedRobot.podbean.com.
The Rusted Robot Podcast. Think about it.
Rusted Robot.
Yeah, that's a whole other story, I guess. What happened to the Rusted Robot? If you were a long-time listener, you know all the details. For more details, you can listen to episode 68 of this podcast. What happened with me and the wife at the time, now my ex-wife. I don't want to get into that because that's depressing, and we're not here to talk about depressing stuff. We're here to talk about you becoming a podcaster, or at least knowing a little bit more what goes on behind the scenes. So there's lots to know, but basically anybody can do a podcast. You can do a podcast right now. You got a smartphone, it's got voice memos on there. You can record whatever you want. You can record it from the microphone on your phone, or you can get a fancy microphone and just plug it in. I wouldn't suggest doing that because, well, why not? Why can't you do that? Well, you can, and then you can just upload it to your computer, send it as an email if it's not too long of a file, and then you can edit it on the software. Okay, so let's go back to the very beginning. What you do is you find some recording equipment. I've got the microphone that I'm using right now. I think it cost me $12 on Amazon. So you get yourself a microphone, you find some kind of recording software. You can use the voice memos on your phone. You can use GarageBand on your phone or your iPad or your computer if you have a Mac or Apple product. If you have Android, I'm sure there's stuff on there too. But when I first started Rusted Robot, I got something called Audacity. And that is where I edit all of my recordings. When I first started the podcast, I actually recorded from a microphone onto Audacity right on the computer. So it's recorded, you can edit it, you can get rid of clicks, because when you're talking on a microphone, it'll pick up all kinds of different things like that, or if you're tapping the table because you're nervous. You can get nervous because you're recording. Even though it's not live in front of an audience, people are going to hear this on the internet. So naturally you're nervous because you're being recorded. There's breathing sounds. If you do that a lot, you might want to get a pop filter to filter a little bit of that out. But basically, you have your recording on your Audacity. And there's other things you can buy besides Audacity. There's like Adobe tools of some kind and other things that I haven't looked into really because you have to pay for them. So if you want to do it cheaply, you download Audacity, you record onto that, or onto your, whatever, on your iPad or your phone or whatever you have, upload it to Audacity, do some editing, get rid of all the crap that you don't want. You can add in sound effects, you could add in little voice clips.
This is Kitty from Jump City Comics, and you're listening to the Soul Forge podcast. Forge your soul.
You can do all kinds of different things. I've been doing it for 5.5 years, and I've got it down to quite the science. Still lots I don't know how to do, I guess. But you get rid of as much of the garbage as you can, and you edit it into a file, and then you just turn it into an MP3. So then you've got your MP3 file, but where do you put it? Well, you need a hosting site. And there are several free ones. I know Anchor is free, and you can actually record on that. That's how lots of people will do, instead of Skype, they'll do Anchor, and I think it has a 45-minute recording window. It's not very reliable, but I've used it with other people. Or you could do Skype if you're doing over the air with somebody, or just have it in a room with someone. So there's all kinds of different ways. But basically, get some kind of hosting site. I know Libsyn is pretty popular. There's other ones. I use Podbean, podbean.com, because it's the most user-friendly one that I've found. And it costs, let me think here, unlimited storage. So each year I pay roughly $125 per podcast for the hosting duties. So it's about $250 for both podcasts. Of course, SoulForge is $125, Rusted Robot's $125, and I can put out as many episodes as I want. So that's one thing you need to do. You need to know what your topic is going to be. Figure that out first of all, because there's something called pod fade. You get really excited about podcasting, and you get 5, 6, 10, 20 episodes, and then it just becomes too much, and you don't have anything else to say, so you fade away, and you've built an audience, and then you're just gone, and people wonder, what the heck happened to those people? And there are lots of podcasts out there. In fact, I'm going to play you a promo for another podcast right now.
The PWR Spot Show is on the air every single week for your wrestling listening pleasure. We talk about professional wrestling. None of that fake stuff here, just Hulk Hogan, pile drivers, and cage matches. So join us at the ProWrestlingRoundtable.com or on ESONetwork.com.
So as you heard, that's a podcast that is here on the ESO Network. And networks are something else that we'll talk about momentarily. But basically, you get your hosting thing. Say you're going to do the way I did it. You go through Podbean. You have a simple uploader thingy on there that your MP3 file goes to. You hit publish, and then it goes off into internet land. But what you need is places where the podcast will be caught. So podcatchers, if you will. There's Stitcher. There is TuneIn, there's Spotify, there's all kinds of different places. iTunes, of course, is the most famous one, or what they call the podcast store. Do they call it the podcast store, or do they call it the Apple Store? They keep changing the name, and I just heard on the radio this morning, actually, that they're getting rid of iTunes, and they're splitting it into 2 or 3 different divisions. One for music, one for podcasts, and I think one for something else. Things are changing in podcast world, but you don't have to worry about that right now. But basically, as it stands currently, iTunes is the biggest podcatcher. That's where most people go. Plug in your iPod, go to subscribe. That's where you're going to find most podcasts. But there's the Google Store and all kinds of different places. So you want to submit your podcast feed to as many different places as you possibly can to get the widest possible reach. So how did I do it? Well, I built a Twitter account for the Rusted Robot back in 2013. Started just tweeting random stuff and found followers and followed of different people. Then I submitted my RSS feed, they call it. That's the actual information that goes to the different podcatchers. So it's a little bit complicated to start, and it took me quite a while to figure all that crap out. But anyway, I ended up recording the first episode of Rusted Robot. It was just 10 minutes. Uploaded it after editing the thing, and off it went. Who knows who actually found it, because we didn't have a built-in audience already. So what happened for us is that we decided we liked podcasting, and we just started recording things and putting them out randomly. But what I've learned, and now that I know better, the best way to do it, figure out maybe 10 episodes worth of content, write it all out, get some kind of a release schedule that you want, and follow it as strictly as you can so people know when to expect your podcast. So with Rusted Robot, I think we did 5 or 6 episodes over a 2-week period just because we didn't know what we were doing. Luckily, Sina from the 10 Forward podcast had tweeted me and said, "Hey, I see that you got a podcast about geek stuff. How would you like to come on the 10 Forward podcast?" And I'm like, okay. And this podcast was based out of the UK, and luckily it had a big enough following, and we were interviewed and talked about our show, and we got most of our followers in the UK because of that. So here's what I would do differently. And I kind of did it when I started SoulForge up in 2017. I figured out what I wanted to talk about, came up with a cool name, a Facebook page, a Twitter account, all the different social medias that I could think of. Wrote down maybe 10 or 15 different topics, but maybe not even quite that many. But I pre-recorded, I think, 4 or 5 different episodes, had them all edited, and then released 4 of them on the first day, so that there was a bunch out there, so that people had content and they knew what to expect. And then I tried to stick to a release schedule. So for example, Rusted Robot comes out every Sunday. I was going to say like clockwork, but there are weeks that I miss because life happens. But I try to get a new episode out every single Sunday. When I first started SoulForge, I figured Mondays were good because I would do Rusted Robot Sunday, SoulForge Monday, but turned out that was hard to keep up because it was just podcast. And I love podcasting. Don't get me wrong, it's one of my favorite things, but that's a lot of work and pressure to put myself under. So I settled on Thursdays for SoulForge. And before, when it was getting going, I didn't care what time Thursday, as long as it was out Thursday, it didn't matter. But now I try to do it around 6 to 6:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time, and have it released and out the door so people don't have to wait till the afternoon. And you make sure you promote the heck out of it on all your social media, hashtag everything, link it in everywhere that you can, join Facebook groups for podcasters, talk about podcasting, make connections. If I could do it, if I could hire a secretary for my social media, I would do that. Like have somebody just constantly interacting with people and cross-promoting and all that kind of stuff, because you want to get a bigger, wider audience, but you also want to produce quality content. And that's really what it's all about. That's why I've purchased better microphones as time has gone on, because I want better sound quality. If I could afford it, I would have a totally soundproof room with chairs that don't squeak, pop filters, sound buffering walls, all that kind of stuff. But that's expensive, and I'm doing this. This is an independent podcast. There are other podcasts, of course, that have sponsors, and you'll hear that quite a bit. If you listen to like Joe Rogan's podcast and Mark Maron's WTF, they'll always say, hey folks, blah, blah, blah. And they'll do their little monologue, and they'll say, you know, don't you hate going to the post office? Well, we've got a deal with stamps.com and blah, blah, blah. And whatever it is, or another famous one is mattress stores, Lisa mattresses, Casper mattresses, all that stuff. Sponsor those shows. There's promo codes and that kind of thing. A while back, actually, we had a guy who had a tie store online, and he said, hey, we'll sponsor you, and just your promo code is Rusted, and if your listeners put that in, we'll give you some money. And of course, he never did. I don't think anybody bought the ties because they weren't very good, but that was the only sponsor we ever had, and we didn't make any money. But a lot of podcasts do make a lot of money, or they'll have like Patreon pages, or people will donate via PayPal. And back in the beginning days of Rusted Robot, we had a few PayPal donations. I've got a Patreon account. Nobody's ever donated to it, and I'm not really sure how to even use the thing. I'll tell you, it's patreon.com/Darth Vaderloo, and you can donate money to the podcast to pay for better equipment or hosting fees or any of that kind of stuff. I just do it because I love it. It'd be great to make some money on the side to pay for the bills, but that's not even important to me. I like making connections to the world. That's why I have the podcast in the first place. That's why I have the Facebook page. I don't use Twitter as much as I should. That's another thing, that you make a lot of connections that way. Instagram, I'm on Instagram, and I think it says it in the end credits that I pre-recorded, which one of these days I have to redo, but it's at Darth Vaderloo. I post all kinds of memes and funny things and different stuff. So you can follow me there. You can go to the YouTube page, which is just under my name, Sean Vanderloo. You look that up and you can listen to all the episodes there online while you're scrolling and doing other things. Promote, cross-promote, talk to people, be on their podcast, have them come on yours, and that's how you get the word out. Just have ideas. Love it or don't do it is my basic advice. And back to networks. When I first started, didn't have a network, didn't want one, just wanted to do it and get the episodes out there and get emails from people and just have dialogue. And then I guess early last year, I was scrolling on Facebook and came across the Earth Station 1 podcast, and I was like, that's a cool name for a show. And on their website, it said, hey, you want to join the network? And so I emailed the guy, and he emailed me back, and we talked on Skype for a bit, and joined the network. So that's ESO Network. That's Mike and Mike. They're great guys. And what we do is we just play each other's promos, and I've been on the Earth Station 1 podcast a few times actually, and I don't know if that's actually given me any more listeners than I already had. It's hard to tell, but there it is. So it's a good group of guys and girls, and it's a lot of fun. I don't know what else I can tell you about podcasting. It's just, if you're going to do it, put your heart into it. It takes up a lot of time. When I first started editing the show, Rusted Robot was an hour-long show, but it could take up to, I think there was one time where it took up to 8 hours to edit the thing. So it's a lot of time, a lot of dedication, and it's a labor of love, really, because there's no money in it. You're not necessarily going to get famous. You have your little crew of people, and I've met lots of great guys, like my British people. There's James, who does the Battle Bridge podcast, and I've been on that show quite a bit. There's Daniel Peter Hitch.
Hello, I'm Daniel Peter Hitch, author of the Bubbles the Pirate children's book series and the Connected Worlds Chronicles. You're listening to the Soul Forge podcast. Keep forging your soul.
And he doesn't have a podcast, but he's been on this show before, somewhere in the 30s for his episode. Go check that out. And of course, Paul Wright, Furbob. We did the Sci-Fi Waffle podcast for about 40 episodes. So one day I have to get over to the UK and visit these guys. And then I know one of the Mikes from the ESO network lives in the Georgia area, I think. And I'd like to go meet him. And there's other people from all over the world that I've, met virtually, I guess, is the best way to put it. And I'd like to do some traveling and go see these people. So basically, to sum it up, get yourself a microphone, something to record on, download Audacity, it's free, get a iTunes account, or whatever they're calling it now, get your RSS feed, that's hard to say, guys. Think of topics that you want to cover. If you're going to do a Star Trek podcast, figure out how you're going to do that. Are you going to do an episode review show? Are you going to do all the episodes or just one series? Are you going to talk about general geekery? Are you going to talk about life in general, like I do here on SoulForge? Do you have a real estate podcast and you want to give real estate advice? Or do you have a daily news show? There are so many topics. There's like a million different podcasts out there and lots to choose from, to listen to. Like I listen to podcasts all day long while I'm delivering the mail, and I love it. And so I eat, sleep, and breathe podcasting, and it's a lot of fun. It can be overwhelming at times. I almost didn't put out an episode this week, but I've kind of taken over SoulForge as my main focus. I still do Rusted Robot, but if it doesn't come out every week, that's not a bad thing. But SoulForge is, I guess, my baby, to put it in those terms. And so I make sure that every Thursday there's going to be an episode. That's pretty much it. I don't have much more to say. If you have questions, of course, you can email me, soulforgepodcast@gmail.com, at soulforgepod on Twitter, which I hardly ever go on Twitter. I need to do that more. I need to interact a bit, but I don't know. There's too much, and it's hard. And if this was my full-time job, then sure I could do that, but it's not. So that's what happens. So anyway, a good thing to remember is that you're in control of your podcast. You can edit. As such, this part that I'm talking about right now is actually recorded several hours after I finished recording the main podcast. I've already gone and given blood, and then I remembered that, hey, the one thing that I really wanted to talk about when it comes to podcasting is titles. The most important thing that you can do is name your podcast something catchy but unique. When I first started SoulForge, I came up with maybe 10 or 15 different titles. I was going to go with Life Garage because it's all about fixing yourself. The tagline would have been, Life Garage, go fix yourself. Because it sounds vaguely dirty, but not quite. Also with titles, episode titles. That is the hardest part of actually for me it is. It's the most difficult part because you want it to be a catchy title. You want it to be something that people might search for. It might be interesting to people. There's a whole search algorithm that podcasts go through as well. I think it's called SEO, search equalization optimization, or something like that. Never really follow it. I just try to pick a fun, catchy title and go with it that way. The last part that I wanted to mention is write stuff down. When I first started Rusted Robot, I had almost a script, and then I went to point form, and finally it's just a vague outline of what I wanted to talk about. For this one here that we're doing right now, I didn't write anything down, I just went stream of consciousness right off the top of my head, and that is why I forgot all about talking about titles and stuff. So make sure you have an outline, show notes, something to guide you until you get comfortable, and even now, 5.5 years later, sometimes you forget stuff. This concludes the addendum. What I would like for you guys to do is subscribe to me on YouTube. You don't actually have to listen or watch my videos. If you could just up my subscriber base, that would be great, because once I get over 100, I can change it from my name to something else, which would be nice. If you haven't left a review in the iTunes store or the podcatcher of your choice, that would be awesome. Can always appreciate that, because that the more reviews you get, the more, I guess, it ups your profile in the... I don't even know how it works, actually. People just say, hey, if you leave lots of reviews, you get more listeners. So that would be great. Love to spread the SoulForge word far and wide. But until next time, thanks for listening. Thanks for coming by. I hope you learned a lot. And remember, if you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down. This has been another episode of the SoulForge Podcast. Find us on Twitter at SoulForgePod, or email the show via soulforgepodcast@gmail.com. SoulForge is a production of Sean Vanderloo and Friends. You can find Sean on Twitter and Instagram at Darth Vaderloo. Remember to visit soulforgepodcast.com for all of our social media links, and share the show with everyone you know. Thanks for stopping by the Forge. We'll keep the fires lit until your next visit.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping through Amazon.com or the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.